Egan. Welcome back. Throughout this election season, we'll be sitting down with candidates you'll see on the ballot, especially the major races. That includes the one involving U.S. Senator Tina Smith. She is making her first official run for public office as an individual candidate this fall. She'll try to hold on to the seat she was appointed to in January following Al Franken's resignation. She also served as lieutenant governor with Governor Dayton for 3 years. Senator Tina Smith is joining us in studio today. Senator, thank you for being here.
It's good to be here, Tom.
Now, you became a U.S. Senator without actually seeking the job. It was in many ways kind of thrust upon you.
An unusual path.
Yes, it was thrust upon you after Al Franken's resignation. Now that you have the job, what do you hope to accomplish and be your primary focus in the Senate if you win election outright to the U.S. Senate?
Since I've been in the Senate, I've focused quite a bit on health care costs. You know, any place I go in Minnesota, I could be talking with farmers or small business people or families in any community around the state, and everybody is talking about health care costs and what a challenge it is. You know, if you can't afford to pay for your health care, if you're trying to choose between paying your insurance premiums and paying your rent, you're not going to be able to have the kind of life that you want to have. So I've spent a lot of time focusing on that.
And health care is one of those issues that impacts every single one of your constituents. There is nobody who is left untouched by that issue.
Absolutely. And you think in Minnesota probably about half the people get their health insurance through their employer, and you know, a lot of people get their health insurance through Medicare or veterans or you know, other public insurance. Everybody is talking about the same thing. How am I going to be able to afford this? So I've really been focused on prescription drug costs, which have been skyrocketing, and it's putting a huge burden on people.
And you also, I know you're a supporter of the Affordable Care Act, but you'd like to go further to single-payer health care. That used to be an issue that even Democrats would kind of shy away from because of the cost, but it seems to be becoming a little more mainstream as the costs continue to skyrocket.
It's surprising when you ask Minnesotans whether they think that there ought to be a, you know, one health insurance program that everybody can participate in, where there's universal health care coverage. People really like that idea. Now, you have to figure out how to get there. When I was lieutenant governor, I talked a lot about how we ought to let people buy into Minnesota Care, you know, have that choice. Some people have that choice. Maybe everybody ought to have that choice and pay for it yourself. And in the Senate, I have been a supporter of the Medicare buy-in. So let people who are struggling to pay that health insurance premium buy into Medicare and get good coverage and more affordably.
One criticism you'll hear a lot from Republicans on universal or single-payer health care, they will say that's government-run health care. It would be exorbitantly expensive. How do you respond to that?
Well, think about how expensive health care is for Americans right now. I mean, I talk to farmers that are looking at health insurance premiums of $40,000, $50,000 a year. They can't afford that. Health care right now is expensive. We ought to be thinking about how we can bring health care costs down, and that's why I've been so focused on prescription drug costs.
Now, your potential opponent in the general election, if you win the primary, Republican Karen Housley, accuses you so far of mostly spending your time in Washington just voting to obstruct President Trump and his agenda. I imagine in some ways you would take that as a compliment.
Well, the thing that I've learned is you have to always be looking for common ground. You got to look for places where you can find agreement. And I'm really proud of the work that I've done so far, working with Democrats and Republicans to try to get some things accomplished. So, for example, my Republican colleague Lisa Murkowski from Alaska and I have done a lot of work on getting better mental health services in schools. That's not a Democratic or Republican issue. It is an issue to help deal with the mental health crisis we've got.
But have you found any common ground with President Trump?
You know, when President Trump came out and said that he thought that we should crack down on China for cheating on our in trade and was really hurting Minnesota's Iron Range, I thought that he did the right thing. I called on him to do that. Now, there's a lot that I disagree with the president on. Last week has been pretty grim. But the point is that when you're in Washington, you got to look for things to get, you know, places where you can work together.
Even if you disagree on many of the larger issues. Now, your primary opponent has run an ad that went viral called Dumpster Fire. He said there's a raging inferno. This is Richard Painter I'm talking about in Washington. He says he will be the best candidate to stand up to President Trump, and that seems to be what he's basing much of his campaign on. Your response to that?
Well, my response is there's a lot more to being a senator than just standing up to the president, and I have been standing up to the president. I called on Scott Pruitt to resign, and he did. He was doing great damage to the ideal of public service by the way that he was self-dealing. I've been calling the president to account for his positions and the actions that he's taken on immigration, the separating children from their parents on the border. I'm not afraid to stand up to the president and call him to account for what he's doing, and I think that is something that Minnesotans want me to do, but they also want us to be talking about their lives and what they're dealing with, not just the dramas in Washington, D.C.
Let's get through a few other issues quickly. You oppose the Republican tax reform and tax cut plan. What do you think is going to be the result of that legislation?
The Republican tax cut plan, it's interesting. When you go out and talk to Minnesotans, a lot of people are not even exactly sure what benefit they've gotten from that. There's so many other factors affecting families' financial security than that. But the end benefit is that it has put $1.5 trillion in debt on our children and grandchildren. It's not like that money was sitting in a bank account somewhere that we then gave back in a tax cut.
Now, mining is a big issue in the northeastern part of our state, of course. Where do you stand on the Polymet mine and also lifting the moratorium on mining on federally owned land near the boundary waters?
Well, my position on Polymet is that this state has a rigorous and long environmental review process. Polymet has been going through this review process for over a decade. It's coming to a conclusion, and if this mine is approved by the DNR with strong financial assurance and good protections for water quality, I think that it should go forward.
Now, I have to ask you about reports also that surfaced late in the week about Congressman Rick Nolan, who allowed a top aide to resign back in 2015 without facing punishment for inappropriate conduct with some female staff members, and then rehiring Jim Swiderski on his 2016 campaign. Some of his opponents are asking him to withdraw from the race for lieutenant governor. Should he withdraw?
Well, I think, first, I want to really commend the women who spoke out and spoke up. It is hard to do that sometimes, and I am really glad that they did it. And let's just all say that everybody ought to have the opportunity to work in a work environment that is respectful and feels safe to them. And, I mean, that's just so important.
But should Nolan withdraw from the race for lieutenant governor?
You know, that is not my decision. That is going to be a decision for others to make. And I'm happy to say I've hung up my prognosticator spurs. So I will we'll see. You know, it's up to them.
In current politics, I've given up trying to predict what's going to happen next, too. Last real quick thing, Brett Kavanaugh, his confirmation is coming up. I imagine you will oppose that.
I am opposing Judge Kavanaugh. The Supreme Court ought to be above politics, and he's been selected from this list that was put together by partisan and ideological groups. I don't think that's the way we should be appointing justices.
All right, Senator Tina Smith, you've got busy days ahead of you in Washington, D.C. and on the campaign trail, and best of luck to you in the primary, and I'm sure I'll see you on the campaign trail. In fact, I'll see you back here in a couple, we'll see you back here on the show sometime soon. Tina
I hope
Smith,
so.
thank you for being here.
Look forward to it.
All right, up next, Kurt Zellers and Mike